All right. Today, we're going to talk about the scale. We're going to talk about our lovely little friend, the scale, the thing that so many of us step on first thing in the morning, or maybe you do it every few days or every week. And we're going to talk about why it's so important to just make sure you really completely detach from this. And I want to give an example from a conversation I had with a client today, for this kind of talk here. And so I was having this conversation with this client and was asking her, hey, like how's your week been going? Checked in with her midweek and everything. And she was telling me, hey, I'm, executing really well, hitting my goals and everything. But the scale was up a couple of pounds today versus what it was last week. And I'm in my head about it, kind of frustrated, trying to detach from it and not let it get to me, but it is getting to me a little bit, which is normal. It's normal, especially when your goal overall is fat loss, to associate the changes on the scale with necessarily fat gain or loss. And when you see the weight on the scale go up, you feel like you're going in the opposite direction. But here are some key things that I highlighted to her. And I think it'd be really important for you, if you're in this situation, for you to look back on yourself to see if you've ever been in this situation and why. I guess the situation is technically a good thing, the way it's described, like the scale weight being up a couple of pounds. I'm also going to talk about why, the huge reason that a lot of people don't even know about, why it's so important to detach from the scale too. But for context with this client, I listened to her message, or I read her message, and I looked over her, all of her data. We keep a log, of all of our clients, of just how their body weight's trending, how it's moving over time, her progress, all of that. I'm like, hey, I get it can be frustrating, the weight on the scale being up a couple of pounds, but keep in mind that your body weight was 5 or 6 pounds heavier just 5 or 6 weeks ago. So for more context too, she started the program at 214. The weigh-in that was getting in her head was she started the program at 218. Sorry, and the weigh-in that was getting in her head was 214 pounds, because last week she had a weigh-in that was 212 point something, 212.8 or 212.9, I think. But she saw 212 on the scale, and now a few days later she saw 214, and I was like, hey, totally get that this can be really frustrating, because you're, overall trying to lose body fat. So, in your head, you want to see that scale go down, and the scale going down slowly over time, trending down, is a sign, most cases, that you are losing body fat. So it's not that the scale is necessarily always useless. It can be a good tool used the right way. But understand your frustration, but look at the big picture here. While this weigh-in might be a little bit higher today versus what it was a few days ago, you started this at 218, and you're down 4 pounds from where you are today, but your lowest weight is about 6 pounds down from where you were 6 weeks ago. And losing 6 pounds on average over a span of 6 weeks is tremendous progress. I know we just have so many misconceptions of feeling like we need to be losing 5 pounds a week. We need to lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks because you heard about, Jamie from The Office, and she did keto and lost that much weight really quickly. But that is not realistic. That is a lot of water weight loss. It's not even fat loss. And that's going to come right back when she adds carbs back to her plan, because carbs cause more water retention. So when you take them out, you lose a bunch of water weight. So that's not realistic. Losing 1 pound of fat on average over time is a tremendous rate of fat loss. So it was hey, you're down 6 pounds on average, around 5 to 6 pounds in 5 to 6 weeks. That's amazing. That is the perfect trend we want to see. While also acknowledging and highlighting this client, she had only been in a fat loss phase for I think a week and a half at this point. So the first 4 weeks of her plan, we were actually not even decreasing calories. We were focusing on eating at maintenance, but she still lost a little bit of weight, even though that was our goal. She even lost a little bit of body fat, and her pictures show that. So I was like, hey, one, even if we were in a fat loss phase this whole time, this would be amazing progress in that direction. Number two, we've only been in a fat loss phase for a third of the time over the past 6 weeks, which makes your body weight being down, 5 to 6 pounds on average even better. And number three, that like your weight on the scale is gonna fluctuate no matter what you do. No matter if you're 100% perfect with your water intake, your calorie intake, your protein intake, your steps, workouts, it will fluctuate day to day. Even if you were to like go to the restroom and poop the same amount every single day too, so that variable was consistent, your weight would still change day to day because your body is going to experience different hormone fluctuations on a day-to-day basis, really no matter what you do. Nobody's hormones are completely stabilized the same exact way every single day, especially women. And those hormone fluctuations cause differences in water retention. So even if all of these variables were absolutely perfect, your body weight is still going to fluctuate up and down. And it's those fluctuations that we just really want to ignore, and we want to pay attention to the overall trend. And this client, her trend, she's down 5 to 6 pounds in 5 to 6 weeks. Her average weight has been consistently going down every week. Her average weight in this fat loss phase has really been going down every week. Her pictures also like showcase the change in the body fat level that she's seeing so far in just a week and a half of being in a fat loss phase. And also the big key of this as to why, or let me take a step back too. The fact that 214 got in her head right there is a sign that she's making progress. Because if 5 weeks ago, or maybe 6 weeks ago, if I were to show her 214 on the scale, she probably would have been really happy about that. Because like I said, she started at around 217, 218. So the sole fact that a weigh-in that just like a month ago, she would have been excited about, and she probably was excited the first time she saw 214 on the scale. The fact that that weight now, 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, is in her head a high weight and going backwards, that right there is like literally like psychological proof she's making progress, because the baseline in her head has changed. And the baseline in her head has only changed as far as like her baseline weight because her weight has actually changed and gone down, right? Like if her weight had not decreased over the past 5 to 6 weeks, then, and she would have been hovering around 217, 218 this whole time, and she saw 214 on the scale, she actually would be excited. But the only reason why 214 got in her head was because she actually saw more progress than that so far and saw 212. So when you find yourself getting frustrated about a scale weight that 3 weeks ago would have excited you, then that right there should be reinforcement that I'm moving in the right direction, because now the goalpost is shifting. Now my baseline is shifting, not only numbers wise, like from what the scale says, but my baseline in my head is changing too. And I'm viewing myself of, okay, my normal weight now is around 214 and a low weight around for me is 212 versus my normal is 217 and 218 and a low weight for me with these fluctuations is 214. Like when your lows and your highs in a given week and your lows and your highs that you view inside of your head shift lower than where they were a month ago, that right there is like a perfect sign like you are on the right track if your goal is fat loss and weight loss. So that I pointed that out to her, and I think that really helped to stick too. And I point this out to all of my clients. Like I always like get a little bit of a smile when I do notice this, because I'm like, we're heading in the right direction. If you get frustrated off of a scale weight that 3 weeks ago you would have been excited about, then that tells us like, hey, things are moving, because in your head that baseline is moving, and even data wise, numbers wise, that baseline is moving. Now, we don't want these negative emotions to come about the scale, but when that happens, I'm like, okay, things are moving. Now we just got to work through that mindset regarding all of this. Now, the last point I was going to make was why it's so important to detach from the scale, especially the lowest weight that you weigh, especially in a fat loss phase, is because you're never going to be able to maintain that lowest weight ever. No matter what you do, you will never be able to maintain the lowest weight that you see on the scale in a fat loss phase. You will always weigh more than that, no matter what, unless you eat in a calorie deficit for the rest of your life, which is not healthy. You're going to run your body into the ground. You're going to lose a lot of muscle. You're going to lose a lot of body fat. And it probably honestly just won't be sustainable to eat in a calorie deficit for the rest of your life. Like the hunger is going to take over and you're going to end up eating more. So the reason being, like, in this example, let's say if, this client got down to 170 and that was like her number one goal weight, right? She's like, I just want to get down to 170. That's what I want to do. Like, and got so attached to that number on the scale. When she shifts from being in a fat loss phase to calorie maintenance, her weight on the scale will probably come up around 2 pounds, maybe even 3 pounds on average. And it's not body fat gain when it does that. And I'll explain kind of what that is. But when you're in a fat loss phase and you're in a calorie deficit, you are essentially kind of depleting your body of different fuel tanks it has. So it has different fuel tanks, and these might not be all of them, but these are the major ones that kind of contribute to like your overall body weight and these fluctuations I'm going to kind of describe. Number one fuel tank is your glycogen stores. So we store glycogen in our liver and muscles, and glycogen is basically carbohydrate. So when we eat carbohydrate, it gets digested, gets absorbed, and gets stored in our body, in our liver and muscles primarily. And when we store carbohydrates, for every gram of carbohydrate we store around 3 to 4 grams of water. So if you're in a fat loss phase and your protein is the same and you bring your calories down to, initiate that calorie deficit, and you keep your fats at a healthy level, so you're not dealing with any hormonal issues from eating too low fat, your carbs will probably have to come down a little bit because like we get our calories from protein, carbs, and fat. So if our protein stays the same and our fat stays the same and our calories come down, our carbs have to be coming down. So in a fat loss phase, you're probably eating less carbs than what you would eat at calorie maintenance, not because carbs are bad or because they cause more body fat, but because those calories have to come from somewhere. So you might eat, let's say, 250 carbs in a maintenance phase, and you might eat 175 carbs in a fat loss phase. So your carbs are down by 75. So that's 75 grams of carbs that you're not storing in your body, which could be maybe, let's say, close to 300 grams of water you're not storing in your body anymore, like 300 grams less of water you're storing, which causes like the weight on the scale to be a little bit lower in a fat loss phase just simply from that, from not having as much water, from not having as much carbs in your system. Another kind of storage fuel tank, I guess you could say, not really a fuel tank, but things that manipulate the water retention that you experience is sodium. And when you're eating, let's say at maintenance, let's say your maintenance calories are 2,500 and you bring your calories down to 2,000 to be in a fat loss phase, you're probably going to eat a few hundred milligrams less of sodium just naturally. You're eating less food. So like food a lot of times has some kind of sodium in it or salt. Even foods that aren't even really like taste that salty probably has a little bit in there. And by bringing your calories down, your salt intake, sodium intake is probably coming down too. And what comes with eating more salt is more water retention. And what comes with eating less salt is a little bit less water retention. And it's not a good or bad thing, it's just how our body balances that salt and water, balance within our systems. So if you're in a fat loss phase, you're probably weighing a little bit less simply because your water retention from sodium is down a little bit. Now, also, we have another quote unquote fuel tank or way that our body weight is lower in a fat loss phase that doesn't have anything to do with fat loss, which is how much food is just circulating through or going through your digestive system at any given point. Food has weight to it. Like if I'm going to eat 2,500 calories in a day, there's a certain amount of food bulk that I'm eating to get those calories. Whereas if I'm eating 2,000 calories a day, there's another kind of weight of food bulk I am eating to get those calories. And there's a good chance if I'm eating 2,000 calories, I'm probably eating less weight in food versus if I'm eating 2,500. So at any given point, you probably have less food going through your stomach, through your small intestine, large intestine, in your colon. You probably have less basically poop in your system waiting to come out too if you're in a fat loss phase. So that's going to cause the weight on the scale to be a little bit lower in a fat loss phase. That doesn't have anything to do with like fat loss. So think of it like when you are in calorie maintenance and you have a sponge, and that sponge is like fully saturated with water, it's not overflowing with water, but it's just fully saturated. And when you go into a calorie deficit or in a fat loss phase, you're kind of squeezing that sponge a little bit and taking out maybe 10% of that water that's in that sponge. So that's causing some of the weight on the scale to be a little bit lower from that. Now, when you go from a fat loss phase into a maintenance phase, your sodium intake kind of goes back up to normal. So your water retention from the sodium goes up a little bit. Your glycogen stores, the carbohydrate stores in your liver and muscles, that goes up a little bit too because you're eating a little bit more carbs. So with more carbohydrates, kind of where it gets the name, you have more water in your system. You're a little bit more hydrated. And then when you're eating 500 more calories at maintenance, you have a little bit more food just going through your system at any given point. And those changes, those differences can make a difference of 2 to 3 pounds on the scale. So if you, like in this client's example or someone else, if you're like so attached to 170 on the scale and that lowest weight you hit, and you're like, I finally hit my low weight of 170, I want to maintain that. Well, when you go into calorie maintenance, your body weight, not body fat level, like this has nothing to do with body fat gain, but your body weight will probably go up by 2 pounds on average at baseline and maybe be 172 or 173, at any given point. And you're like, I gained 2 to 3 pounds back. But really, that wasn't anything to do with fat gain. It was just all those systems, those fuel tanks, all of that kind of being refilled back up and a little bit extra water coming with all that. Now, you might think, well, I'm just because I want to maintain 170, I'm going to get down to 167 or 168. So then when I go into maintenance, I'll actually be 170, which you can do. But if you get so attached to the number on the scale, there's a good chance when you see that 167 or that 168, that your brain is going to want to stay there. You're like, oh, like this actually is cool. Stepping on the scale and seeing the 160s, those numbers. I want to try to maintain this. But remember, you can't. It's impossible. You're not going to be able to maintain that lowest weight that you ever see because that lowest weight you see is in a more depleted state, especially water weight wise. And every time you go back into maintenance, that's going to increase and go back up by a couple of pounds. Now you might think, well, I just want to maintain in the 160s, so I'm going to get down to 165, and then I'll maintain around 167, 168. That's a fine way and approach to take, but you just have to make sure you don't get so attached to that lowest number that you ever see, because that lowest number you ever see, you'll never be able to maintain. Another analogy with this really quick is it's almost like you have a car and you have all these different tanks with fluids. You have your oil, you have your gas, you have your windshield wiper fluid, power steering fluid, all this kind of stuff. And it's like when you're in a fat loss phase, all of those tanks are like maybe 75% of the way full or half full. They're not completely full. And if you were to weigh your car on a huge scale, it would have a certain number. It would weigh a certain number. And then you go and fill up all those fuel tanks and make them capped off at 100%. You're not overflowing them, so you're not gaining quote unquote body fat back, but you're just filling them up. And that car is going to weigh a little bit more from having those fuel tanks actually filled up. And the car didn't gain any actual mass on its body. You didn't add any parts to it. You just filled up those fuel tanks. And it's the same concept when it comes to our body weight in a fat loss phase versus a maintenance phase. So it's important to realize you're never going to be able to maintain that lowest weight possible you ever see on the scale because of, that shift in holding a little bit more water, holding a little bit more glycogen, a little bit more food in our digestive system when we go into maintenance. So really important to just detach from the scale for that reason too. So hopefully this is eye-opening and helpful. Appreciate you all, and I will see you guys in the next one.